77. That's how many tracks have hosted a Formula 1 race in the history of the sport. But what happened to the tracks forgotten and abandoned through time? Tracks where politics and money caused F1 to ditch them, only to never host F1 races again. Well, there are 8 tracks we're going to explore in this video, and we're going to rank them from best to worst. My name's Jake, welcome. On to the first track. Let's set the scene. Alonso just won back-to-back championships and was well on his way to winning again in 2007. So the Spanish government thought, well, another track on the east coast of Spain would be a good idea, but this time it would be a street track around a harbour, sort of like a Spanish version of Monaco, I guess. Now, they brought in Herman Tilke to sprinkle some of his magic into the track design. At this point in time, he'd made some amazing tracks: Istanbul, Sepang, Shanghai. So you would think that this track would be another banger, right? Well, here are some highlights from Valencia over the 5 years that F1 raced there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. In 2009, there was 0 on-track overtakes. This is literally a poor man's Monaco. Now, as I said, Valencia hosted 5 F1 races, but it was supposed to have 7. So what happened? Well, from 2013, it was supposed to begin alternating with the Barcelona track for the Spanish Grand Prix, but the event organisers ran out of money and yeah, it never happened. But what about the track? Well, I've raced hundreds of laps of this track in F1 2009 and I actually kind of liked it. I thought it was a good track, but obviously in reality, that never came to light. Sort of how Bahrain hasn't been a great track for overtaking over the years, but is really good on the F1 games. So what would you rank it? I think for me, obviously this is just my opinion, but I think I would rank it a C tier. I think that's fair. It's basically only known for having crashes and being abandoned, so I don't really think you can rate this track very highly, and I don't think it would still be on the calendar today, even if they did have the money. It's just not a good enough track. And the next circuit is one you may have heard of, but in my books, it was basically Bowser's Castle. I want you to imagine, right? Volcano, falling rocks, it was the French Nordschleife. This place was insane. The circuit in question, Circuit de Girard. Now, this wasn't your typical purpose-built F1 track. It was nicknamed the French Nordschleife because of how challenging the track was to race. It hosted the French Grand Prix 4 times between 1965 and 1972 and was won by legends like Jim Clark and Jackie Stewart. Now, this is the cool bit. It was a street track which snaked around the base of a volcano. Bowser's Castle. The track was super high speed for the time with massive elevation changes and tight corners, everything you need for a great track. But while that's exciting for drivers and fans, that thrill comes at a cost. Safety was a big issue. They didn't have the proper runoff areas, which meant that any crashes would have really been fatal. And something else I found when I was doing my research, volcanic rocks used to fall from the side of the track. I mean, could you imagine just driving around and getting hit on the head with one of the rocks like some blue shell or Mario Kart? It's just crazy. Now, by the early 70s, safer tracks were being built and Girard was eventually dropped from the F1 calendar. But where would we rank this track? Well, it does look like a French Nürburgring. It's long, tight, twisty track, a volcano, public roads, no runoff. Sounds pretty good to me. And it's definitely up there as one of the cooler abandoned tracks. So I think I'm going to have to rate this S tier. Now, the next circuit isn't a place very close to home for me. I'm a Londoner. And Crystal Palace actually hosted a London Grand Prix, but not in the way you would think. See, back in the old days of F1, you had 2 types of race meetings: championship and non-championship events. Now, as the name suggests, a non-championship event doesn't give you points towards the F1 World Championship. So, the last championship event at Crystal Palace took place in 1962 and was won by Inns Ireland, but the last race for F1 cars was actually a non-championship event in 1970, won by Jackie Stewart.
And a nice start from Beutler. Morgan tucks into his slipstream. Mike Beutler in the yellow Brabham BT28 20-lap race around Crystal Palace, and Walker leads now. Trevor Morgan is up into 4th place, and Beutler is right back into 6th position. Walker crosses the line, and Hunt is going to go through and take. Hunt puts both his wheels on the grass. There is James Hunt behind him, number 21 in the Lotus. And Morgan is holding on. Hunt tries to take him on the outside. Because look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cars are in it for 6th place, 2nd place. David Walker from Australia in the Lotus wins. and a terrific shunt all the way down the finishing straight, and there are bits of Formula 3 motorcar all over the track there.
Now this track dates all the way back to 1899, and it used to have a banked corner. And don't forget, this track is in the park. That is just insane. And that's what it was. It was literally a race through a park. There was trees, no runoff, it was a super narrow track. It was basically just rich dudes back in the day finding places to drive their cars. Picture Fast and Furious, but in the 60s.
I got family.
But something happened. They complained about the noise, so the race got shut down. So, what about the rating? Well, it's narrow. There probably wasn't much overtaking. It was quick. They averaged around 100 miles an hour, so it's literally Monaco in a park. It's not surprising really that it was a non-championship event. That being said, I do hope we get a London Grand Prix again very soon. I'm gonna have to rate it a C tier. On to track number 4 then, the Vietnam circuit. It has a short and somewhat unfortunate history, but I bet you can't guess who designed the track. Yeah, it was Herman Tilke. Now the track snakes through the streets of Hanoi and has a purpose-built section for more dynamic layout. It's got a good mix of high-speed straights and tight corners. It was inspired by tracks like Monaco and Suzuka. Now we all know the story. The track's debut was planned for 2020, however, coronavirus said Spanish or vanish, and well, that's exactly what happened. Now it was initially delayed to 2021, but it never came to be, and that was because one of the key guys behind the race was arrested for corruption charges. F1 has a bit of a habit of attracting these types of people. They've really got to work on that problem. Now today this circuit is really just a concrete reminder of what could have been. There's some local racing that occurs on a shortened version of the track, but we don't really know what's happening with it at the moment. To be honest, I don't know if we'll ever see it on the calendar. Now in terms of ranking, I actually quite liked it on the F1 2020 game. It reminded me of the old Jeddah before they moved the barriers back with the blind corners. It's tricky but also very quick, but you know, how do we really know if any of that will translate into real life if we haven't raced there? So I'm going to have to give this a rating of B. Now for the next one, we're going to Logan Sargent's backyard, the US of A.
Greatest country in the world.
And the Dallas Grand Prix circuit of 1984 is the perfect bad example of F1 failing miserably to try and crack the US. Now it was originally envisioned as a way to boost the city's image. They opted for a temporary street track built in Fair Park, which is a public park in Dallas. But there were so many things that went wrong for this race. Literally everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Before they even got running on track, construction was rushed, so they weren't even sure if the track was okay to drive on. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. They didn't know if it was safe, not that they particularly cared back then. And probably the worst part, they decided to race in July. Now, I don't know about you, but Texas, July, F1 cars, that's not really a great combination unless you like heat stroke. And because of that heat, the track surface was rapidly deteriorating. It was breaking apart, it was becoming really bumpy, and there's also that famous clip of Nigel Mansell pushing his car over the finish line and then fainting. Again, because of the heat. So yeah, they didn't plan this very well. Now fortunately, there was only a single race held in Dallas with F1 cars, and guess who won? Well, it was none other than your favourite Monaco-based YouTuber who beat the two greatest F1 drivers of all time in Equal Machinery's father, Keke Rosberg. Now of the 26 cars that qualified, only 8 finished. Now of course, that was mainly due to the heat. It was 38 degrees centigrade, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It was just way too hot to be racing. The race itself wasn't particularly exciting and fan attendance wasn't as expected. So after all of that, why didn't F1 return? Well, they didn't make any money, obviously. It was a disaster. I mean, the circuit just wasn't suitable for F1. They did look at alternative locations for future events, but they just couldn't get the money. Now, despite all of that history, all was not lost. Texas did eventually get their F1 race in the end. We now have Circuit of the Americas. But what would I rank the Dallas Grand Prix track? Well, I would rate it S just purely off of the stories and chaos that this weekend created. But the track really is just chicanes, so I'm going to have to give it a rating of C. Now next up we have the very first racetrack that held a Formula 1 event in France. Reims. Now, there's not much to say on this track. It's mainly made up of public highways. The track to me is like if you put two Mulsanne straights from Le Mans with Baku's main straight with the corners. Is basically what Reims is. The first race took place in 1925, but by the 50s things got a bit too dangerous even for F1 standards, which really says something about this track. There were a number of crashes and basically F1 said, thanks, but no thanks. And by 1966, the track had had its last hurrah. Jack Brabham took the final win, and the track closed soon after in 1972. Obviously, it wouldn't have been attracting big money or fans because, well, F1 was no longer in town. In terms of ranking, I'm going to have to give this a C tier. It's nothing special. I don't particularly like the track from looking at it. Doesn't look particularly exciting. Yeah, not for me. Last two tracks then. First up, we've got the Avis Grand Prix circuit, and I mean, come on, just look at this bad boy. Beautiful. I mean, that is going straight into S tier. I don't care what anyone says. The track is famous for those insanely banked corners. Compared to Indianapolis and Daytona Speedway, you can see just how much steeper the banking was at this track. 43 degrees, that is just insane. I mean, you wouldn't want to go over the top of that banking, that's for sure. Now, it was first run in 1926, back when F1 was called Grand Prix Motor Racing, and then later again in 1959. I mean, just look at this track. It features a super tricky sequence of corners, whether it's the long straights or the left turns. It looks super difficult. It makes Monaco look like child's play, really. Avis was closed in 1999 and hasn't been raced on since. In terms of ranking, as I said, S tier. Just the sheer difficulty of the track to race on, right? It must have been so tough to get through the 4 corners on this track. Finally then, we're heading to Mother Russia herself for the final abandoned F1 track, the late Sochi Autodrome. The first Grand Prix was held in 2014, but ever since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has been removed from all international championships. That obviously includes F1. But putting that aside for a moment, here are some highlights from Sochi over the years.
Now as we run down and locking up brakes, Nico Rosberg goes into the lead.
That is Roman Grosjean, and that is a very big crash indeed. Into the barriers towards the exit of turn 3.
Wait for it, wait for it. Oh, there it goes. She turned into the right rear puncture. Oh, he's ran again.
Front left tyre. Jack was maybe a bit slow going up as well.
Lando, what do you think about it, Inter? What do you think about it in Inter?
No! This is full wet, boys. I got a box.
Oh, dear. More work for the boys tonight.
Nice moment to thank my critics, to whom it may concern.
Valtteri, it's James.
Now, when Mazepin was obviously kicked out of Haas, Sochi also went with him. The Grand Prix layout was then dismantled and there's only a short circuit now. Now, I've got to be honest with you guys, I actually did like the track. There were some great races over the years. It was one of the few front limited tracks on the calendar as well. For those of you who don't know, front limited basically means that the front tyres degrade quicker than the rears. But it was the one track you could count on for a Bottas win as well. That seems to be one of his real strengths as a driver of those types of circuits. In terms of ranking, I'm going to give this A tier. I personally really like the track. There were some proper banger races there. 2021 was pretty good, and unless you're a Norris or Stroll fan. But yeah, what do you think? Should any of these tracks make a comeback in the future? I think Avis should be a strong candidate. Maybe. But in all seriousness, I did notice that a lot of these were street tracks, which F1 is really pushing at the moment, which begs the question, what is so good about them versus permanent circuits? Well, if you want to find out, you can watch this video here. Thanks for watching. If you're new, welcome, and I'll see you there.